eating their breakfast or whatever. And people were really talking, they were excited, and there was something going on. I had no idea what. And they're talking about Jewish cemeteries having been destroyed and a synagogue on fire, and it made no sense to me whatsoever. I had no idea what was going on. And then when I got to my place of work, which was in Mannheim, the window of the shop where this electrotechnic business was located had been smashed in, and my boss told me to go home. Again, I had no idea what this was all about. I just thought, this is amazing. I mean, something like this had never happened ever before, and I had no idea what it was all about. By the time I got home, there were about 100 people in front of the house on the Bunsenstraße where we lived, and all the windows were on the first erste Etage. All the windows were broken, and the window frames were broken, and everything from the inside of the house was thrown out through the windows. And there was a little garden in front of the house with an iron fence, so all this stuff, everything from the house was in this area in front of, between the house and the street. And I made my way through the crowd. The people were just there looking, they didn't do anything. And when I got in, my parents were bloody, they had been beaten up. The place was totally destroyed and ransacked, and that was the one of all the Jewish homes that were on that particular list had been sold. So that was my experience. So then I helped my parents clean up, and they were shook up, had no idea what was going on. They did not understand why, how, or anything. They're just dumbfounded. And my father thought of himself as a very loyal, good German. He could not understand at all how this could be and what it was all about. The people that did the damage and beat them up were people that they didn't know. I mean, these were not local people. They were from somewhere. And I say, you've heard a lot about the Kristallnacht. That's the way I experienced it. So I was fortunate then. I was 15 years old, and the cutoff point for Schutzhaft and subsequent concentration camp was 16. So my father at evening was collected by the SS that came, two gentlemen, very well dressed, very polite, with a list telling my father that he should pack a suitcase, and waited for him to pack his suitcase, and we will take you to Schutzhaft, a word that he had never, my parents had never heard before, didn't have any idea what this was all about, and my father, dutifully, as most Germans in those days did, when somebody said do that, we did it. And so my father was then off to a concentration camp in Dachau, and we managed to survive. My mother, a very enterprising woman, very smart and very energetic, found a way of bribing some people and got my father released from concentration camp. So my father came back after about 4 months. And my worst experience of the Holocaust was my father coming back from the concentration camp. Never then or in the rest of his life did he ever say one word about his experience in the concentration camp. He just couldn't talk about it. And he was about, let's see, we're talking about the ate 50, 55, 56 years old. So here was this man, 55 years old, who was sitting there, and it seemed like forever, but he was maybe week, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and cried. That's all he could do. He couldn't talk, he couldn't function in any way, he just sat there and cried. I mean, he was just, and you know, after a few days and after a couple of weeks, there was really a feeling, you know, is this going to be the rest of his life? I mean, it was a very, very, for me, as I say, the worst experience that I went through. And I had a friend who was a couple years older who had gone to the concentration camp with my father. He was 16 and thus taken away, and from him I had learned what had gone on in the concentration camp, and he had helped my father, and enough said. You've heard that story before, what the concentration camp was all about. So that was my experience, and I must say that in May 1939, I went to England with a kinder transport. I don't think that I particularly felt or realized what that was all about, or took particular note of it, but for my parents it clearly was goodbye, and they didn't know whether they're ever going to see their child again. So it was a very big experience for them. I don't think that I was old enough to react to that in a particular way. Just so, what I remember from England, northern England is a cold place and it rains a lot. And this was a period of time where I learned what it was like to be cold and to be hungry, not have enough food. I mean, where you could have eaten more, but there wasn't enough. So clearly that was a growing up experience. So much of that. What do I think of all that today? I was then 16 years old. I'm now 93, believe it or not. Very few people get to be that old, and very few people get to be that old and have their brain functioning reasonably, not at top form, I'm sure, but reasonably. So the way I feel today is I survived a war that many of your grandparents didn't survive. So in that sense, I'm a very lucky person. On the other hand, I had lived in a country that started a war, democratically elected government, population, above average education. Germany at that time was one of the leading countries of the world, and mostly Christians. You want to think about that. Nazi Germany came into being at a time where the country had democratically elected government, and the population was one of the best educated in Europe, and the majority of those people were Christians. Very small number of non-Christians in Germany at that time. So those of you on your question who asked me what I think about Mr. Trump, it is possible in a democratic country of even less educated people than the Germans were at that time to accept ideas that seem totally absurd to others, or to the majority, or what I hope to be the majority in America. But you really want to think about that you always think of, Nazi Germany was sort of an aberration, something unusual, something that would never happen again. Well, it's happened in many countries, and it continues to happen. And at this point in time, in the United States, we're facing a problem just like that. Somebody who's essentially screaming his head off, saying very little that makes sense, but having found discontented segment of the population. So it's not all that far-fetched. It's not all that exceptional kind of a thing. So you can think in terms of, so Germany isn't all that bad, or you can think of it in terms that that kind of thing can happen anywhere. So I grew up in a country that started a war, 60 million people dead, a war that for the first time accepted the notion of bombing and eliminating huge parts of the civilian population on all sides. It's not just Germans. Germans started the idea of bombing civilian population, but everybody did it. And I have a good friend here in Germany who wrote an article in a book called Die Stunde Null. If you haven't come across that, probably haven't, but in that particular book, a bunch of Germans that had risen to prominence in post-war Germany after World War II were invited to talk about the end of the war. And in that particular book, Die Stunde Null, the book was published in 1995 by the DVA Verlag. I could suggest that. This man's name is Quasar, a very prominent physicist who ran the Max Planck Institute for Solid-State Physics in Stuttgart. And he writes his experience as a 16-year-old boy during the bombing of Dresden. And I recommend that as to those of you who are interested in history of the Second World War, a very insightful book about how a 16-year-old, smart 16-year-old, saved his grandmother and escaped from the burning city of Dresden, where I think 200,000 people died in the course of one bombing raid. So this war ended with the country where I live now having accomplished the unique feat of somebody pushing a button, dropping a bomb that killed 300,000 people at one crack, at one time. So I can't say that I'm very proud of the generation of people that I represent. I left your parents, or my generation left your parents with what I think of fairly Pittsburgh. I think that your parents have done a little better in the time after the war. European Union idea of taking care of each other, particularly taking care of the ones that are less fortunate. And but I really can't say that I am proud of the role that my generation has played, or that I feel that we're a good example to our grandchildren. So I don't feel that I have to apologize. I don't think I personally had a great deal to say about this, but I just want you to know that I don't think this problem that we are discussing here being one of Germany or whatever country, it's a problem of a generation of people who had acquired a certain level of comfort, of luxury or of easy living. Very few people were hungry in those times. But clearly, you can't assume because you're doing well that you have the wherewithal to withstand the efforts of human nature. And when you look at America today and hear what Mr. Trump has to say, it shouldn't come as a surprise. So this is something that you have to think about and figure out how you personally are going to deal with it, because I can say that I'm not very proud of what my generation did. Now, what have I learned living in America for all these years? Very, very important lesson I've learned is that America being a country of immigrants, it was everybody in America came from somewhere else. The largest representation of national origin in America today is Germans. There are more people who identify themselves as being of German heritage than any other group. 16% of Americans, when they're asked, what is your ancestry, say they're German. About 50 million people. This is changing significantly, and I think most people in America feel that it's been a good thing. Because one of the things that I have learned is that immigrants, people who are voluntarily, or maybe not voluntarily, but out of necessity, leave their